Okay, well, everyone, welcome back. Thank you for going quickly to get your lunches and going back to your seats. We appreciate it. We have a fantastic panel now with election integrity. Let me just tell you a little bit about our panelists. I want to start first and foremost with the gentleman who is responsible for helping us put this event on today. He is the chairman of the Texas Public Policy Foundation and the former election integrity director for the Republican National Committee, Mr. Josh Finley. And I'd like to introduce Jake Evans. He is a well-respected attorney from Atlanta, a groundbreaking trailblazer on election integrity and election law, and one of the state's leading election law attorneys. Jake Evans. Well, I already started. And I would like to introduce, he doesn't need a big long introduction, he told me, so I'll just tell you the most important thing, and that is, he is President Trump's attorney, Mr. Mark Moiser. And my husband, who is going to be moderating this panel, is also an election law attorney. He practices law in Georgia and Washington, D.C., and he chairs election operations subcommittee for the RNC, and is a member of the RNC Election Integrity Committee, Faith Engagement, and RNC Rules Committee. And I'm proud to say that during the 2020 election, he is the only Republican attorney in the state of Georgia to win an election law case on behalf of the Committee to Defend the President regarding the 2020 election. So I'm really proud of him for that, and that's Jason Thompson, and he's going to be moderating this panel.
National. Please give a hand to Julianne for putting this whole thing on. I'm going to go into a little more detail introducing our guests because I think it's important and who they are. And one thing I want to tell you is, all three of these gentlemen here, I consider election integrity experts. Now what's important is that I would highly doubt that they put out there that they are election integrity experts. So my whole point in this is, if you hear somebody saying that they are an election integrity expert, odds are they're not. Okay? Because there's a lot out there that say that they are, and they are not. There's some charlatans that are out there that's saying that they are, making money off of it and traveling around. They're not. These three gentlemen actually are. And I'm grateful that they're all here today, and I want to tell you a little bit more about them before I start asking them some questions. All right? First one to my left is Josh Finley. And as you heard, Josh is the director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation's National Election Protection Project. Previously, he was the first ever national director of the election integrity for the Republican National Committee. And that's where I got to know Josh pretty well, where he was responsible for building the organization's national election integrity infrastructure, implementing the party's first national issue reporting system, and placing over 80,000 new citizens in election rolls. So Josh's work has been covered in Washington Post, New York Times, The Hill, Political. He's testified before Congress multiple occasions, and most recently is an expert for the U.S. House Committee on Administration's 2022 Midterms Look Back Series, Election Observer Access. He's previously served as legal counsel to presidential campaigns, where he's run as an election integrity war room for the White House, and numerous other things. He has a graduate degree, or a degree in political science from BYU and from the University of Georgia Law School. Next, Jake Evans. Jake is with Greenberg Traurig, an experienced litigator, does complex litigation, high-stakes cases across the country. Clients trust Jake with their challenging cases. He has a litigation practice with class action disputes, disputes involving breach of contract, and especially for these purposes, political law. He's recently a candidate for the U.S. Congress, 6th District. He has recently, well, in the last few years, overturned 3 elections on his election law cases. Okay? That's impressive. And we'll get into some of those cases in a little bit. And then at the very end is Mark Moiser. Mark is with the Dillon Law Firm out of California, Harvey Dillon's law firm. That's the Dillon Law Firm. He's an election law lawyer, and over the last decade he's been involved in California politics, running for Secretary of State there, as well as the U.S. Senate in California. And he's been involved in some of the nation's closest election contests, working both in Wisconsin, Michigan. In the last year, Mark was the attorney organizing President Trump's legal team as they responded to the 96 lawsuits that were brought to remove President Trump from the ballot based upon misconstrued interpretations of the 14th Amendment. Mark's a student of history, apparently loves James Madison. Mark, hopefully you know my friend Kevin Gutzman. If not, I'll introduce you. Mark is an avid Ironman guy and involved in, and if you Google Mark or look him up on YouTube, because he's got a very interesting story about how he's involved in that and actually died at one point. Okay, so he's got an amazing story, and I'm so happy for all 3 of them to be here today. I think I'll go in this order. We'll start with Josh, and then Mark. I want to end with Jake because I want to kind of end on an exciting note with his cases because they're really interesting. So Mark, Josh, what do you think is the biggest election integrity issue this cycle?
Well, I would say in Georgia, I think the biggest election integrity issue is protecting the power of your local election officials. Specifically, this issue about certification that y'all are tackling. And just so you know, this is a national issue. I mean, in Michigan, there is a big campaign from the Attorney General and the Secretary of State to make it an issue up there. We've seen instances in Nevada of the Secretary of State trying to take power from election officials. But I think the bottom line is this: as long as you have people trying to take away the power to even question what is happening from local election officials, that's a problem. The biggest thing that we saw in 2020 was that there was doubt and mistrust about the election, right? Because people wouldn't answer questions. Election officials wouldn't answer questions. Courts declined to hear cases, like even, set court dates and things like that. And as long as there aren't answers, people are going to wonder what happened. And I think in Georgia specifically, the things that you're doing to protect the power of your local election officials is a huge, huge deal. Very, very important.
Have you done any work on election certification in Georgia?
Yeah, we have. We've done a lot. So it's kind of funny. Janelle King is actually a very good friend of mine. So I'm from Georgia originally. I still have a house in Athens, actually, even though I'm based out of D.C. right now. The first call that Janelle made after she was appointed to the state elections board was, I think, to me, because she knows my background on election integrity. And she said, I don't know a ton about election integrity right now, but I want to do the best job I can. And so we talked through kind of what some of the issues are, and told her to talk to Dr. Johnston about that and, get on the right side of the issues. What we have done, though, the concerning thing to me is there is a lot that happens outside of Atlanta. Are y'all familiar with what happened in Macon, Georgia about certification? Is anybody familiar with this? So this is a fascinating story that I don't think is getting enough coverage. So in Macon, Georgia, it is well documented, Bibb County, an hour and a half south of Atlanta, it is well documented during the primary election that people got the wrong ballots. Like Georgia Public Broadcasting wrote articles about it, right? This is not like a conservative media thing. It's very well documented. And they had, there was a member of the Board of Elections down there that just wanted to know how many people were sent the wrong ballot. Very simple question, right? Something that, you'd think someone who was responsible for certifying an election would want to know the answer to. Well, what was interesting was there was a group called Protect Democracy that had an attorney on the ground in Macon, Georgia, to advise the county attorney and tell the county attorney to tell that Board of Elections official that he could not even ask questions about what happened in that election. That tells me that there's a lot of organization happening by some of these liberal groups, not only to organize around certification and to make sure that their interpretation of the issue is out there, but also to have lawyers on the ground outside of Atlanta to advise people on how to vote or what questions they can and can't ask. In my mind, that is a very concerning thing. If you've got a difference of 11,000 votes at the top of the ticket, 11,000 votes, you can make that up in a lot of places outside of Atlanta. And so the way that the left has organized around this, they were the first out of the gate, sending letters from the Democrat Party. And then to have people throughout the state organized around this issue is concerning. So, I'm sure Jake and Jason, y'all have things covered in Atlanta. We have been trying to organize things outside of the metro area so that in these, municipalities, Albany, Savannah, Gainesville, places like that, there is still representation so that people know, what liberal groups are advocating for the local governments in those areas.
Okay. Would you like to talk about the SAVE Act? Can you explain that to us, the SAVE Act and non-citizen voting?
Sure. So non-citizen voting has become a big issue for this election cycle. Is everyone familiar with what the issues around non-citizen voting are? I'm seeing some people shaking their heads. So just briefly, right, what it is what the Democrats say is yes, it is already illegal to vote. Why do we need, for non-citizens to vote, why do we need more legislation around this? Well, what the SAVE Act does, I guess what the loophole is you can register to vote in a lot of places with a student ID, for example, right? There's no proof of citizenship required to get a student ID at a college a lot of times. You can register to vote, obviously, with a driver's license, but not every state requires proof of citizenship to get a driver's license. So what the SAVE Act does is it requires documentation when you register to vote to show your proof of citizenship, right? So the idea is that people, non-citizens can't even get on the voter rolls at the very beginning. This bill was drafted, essentially the first meeting about it was out of our office in DC. Chip Roy is one of the sponsors of it, so we've been a part of that bill from the very beginning. And I think it's necessary, again, to inspire confidence in the election process. We see a lot of municipalities trying to pass laws allowing non-citizens to vote. It happens in New York. It happened in Vermont. The more that we can do to protect who is allowed to register to vote, I think the cleaner it's going to keep the voter rolls and keep only legal people allowed to vote in our elections.
All right. One of the swing states, obviously, that's very important is Pennsylvania. Your organization did work in, I believe it was Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So our organization, the Election Protection Project, was formed because, following what we saw in 2020 and 2022, we believe in a couple of things. One is, once votes are cast, the election's done. The cake is baked, right? We need to fix things well in advance of the election. Second thing is that a major problem with our elections is election administration, right? So I guess as a little background on this, I was a legal counsel for the Trump campaign in 2020. I did a lot of things for the president legally then, but when it came to election day, I ran the election war room out of the White House, which meant that we had lawyers in 25 states. They were reporting things in, And every 15 minutes, I had to give a synthesis of those reports to the campaign manager and, to the president, to the general counsel. And we saw the problems that were happening all around the country, but there were questions about it, right? Questions of process, questions of documentation. And so when I joined the RNC and we, put 80,000 new people in place and gave them this issue reporting system, they reported back 25,000 issues. And what was fascinating is in all of the states that we examined, there's 17 of them, the same issues were reported, maybe in a different order, but these were the things that kept people from voting. It was problems with the machines. And I don't mean machines flipping votes. It's more like you show up to vote, the machines aren't working. Or, like the problems in Maricopa County, things don't scan properly, right? It was problems with ballots, running out of ballot paper, being printed incorrectly, things like that. And then chain of custody and meaningful observation. These are all election administration issues. And we believe that if you can fix election administration well ahead of the election, there's less that you have to litigate after the election and a better chance to win. So going to Bucks County, long way of getting there. Bucks County was a county just outside of Philadelphia, like South Bucks County is basically Philadelphia, where in 2020 there were just huge problems with the absentee ballots and the drop boxes, right? It was one of those places where they didn't even know how many drop boxes they had, but they were cardboard. There were videos of them, like people ballot harvesting, which is illegal in Pennsylvania, just putting stacks of ballots in there. But the judges said, once the ballots are in the box, there's nothing we can do about it. Chain of custody was just a mess. So we went in there in early 2023, and we said, look, first of all, let me say we always hate drop boxes, right? Like it's not a secure way to vote. We said if you're going to have drop boxes, we need to increase transparency and security. It'll be better for you because it will increase people's confidence in the election. It'll be better for us because we're going to know what's happening. And we went to Bucks County because it's a Democrat county. Everyone always says you can't make changes in Democrat counties. It was a county that Politico wrote articles about saying so goes Bucks County, so goes Pennsylvania, and therefore kind of the implication the national election. And then, it was going to be a challenging environment, but we wanted to take on that challenge and see if our efforts in election administration will work. Well, bottom line is, if you go to Bucks County today and look at a drop box, they only have 11 of them, and they are all in government buildings, which means that they are only open during business hours. It's the Board of Elections office and libraries. They have a live person sitting next to the drop boxes, telling people that you can't ballot harvest. They are all video cameraed, and you can go to the Board of Elections office at any time and watch all of the drop boxes on the video cameras. So what we were able to show is that, common sense election administration improvements work. And we've done that in, all of the counties around Philadelphia. We've done it in Milwaukee and other states. And so that was kind of our first test project. And it's proven to be very effective kind of all over the country.
So let me ask you this question. I want to ask you about the Republican National Committee. Right?
Okay.
Actually, we haven't really talked about this per se, but you were hired as the election integrity director in
2021.
21, okay.
Yep.
So from the time you got there till, I'm sure you're kind of keeping up with how things are going, until now, what changes have you seen that were made from where we were at the RNC until, at least until you left or until now? Can you address that?
Yeah, definitely. So, yes. So I went straight from the Trump campaign to be the National Director of Election Integrity at the RNC. It was the first time that the RNC was allowed to have an election integrity operation because of what we call the consent decree. Are y'all familiar with this? No? Doesn't look like it. Essentially what happened was way back in 1981, the RNC engaged in some activities. They were sued by the DNC and the Democrat Party of New Jersey. It was in 1981 in the New Jersey governor's race. They got sued, and they entered into what is called the consent decree. And that was something that the RNC agreed to. And it said that they could not do any election integrity activities at all. And they enforced it so strictly that when I was doing political work for the RNC in previous election cycles, like if I was on a phone call and they started talking about election integrity, or I was in a meeting, I would literally have to disconnect from the phone call or get up and leave. That was the extent to which the RNC, did not engage in election integrity. This is significant because, as most of you know, to be credentialed to be a poll watcher, you have to go through the party. And to not have the national organization, the most well-funded Republican Party in the country, participating in that was a big problem. What it meant was that we were funding election integrity operations through campaigns or state parties, but usually the biggest campaign on the ticket. And what happens, everybody knows this, what happens when a campaign ends? Just disappears, right? Like if you win, everybody joins the administration. If you lose, everybody just finds other things to do. So we did not have a full-time election integrity operation. Meanwhile, the Democrats did. Like these left-leaning organizations were heavily funded, extremely well organized. Sorry, I've got an insulin pump going off here. And we just had no counter to that. So when I went to the RNC, what I advocated for was setting up something long-term where we could build infrastructure. The first thing I thought, like version 1.0 needed to be putting people in place. Like, can we put folks in place to do these poll working and poll watching roles? Well, yes, we put 80,000 new people in place. And the thing about that is there has to be paper documentation, right? Like, I know there's questions sometimes about RNC numbers, but there has to be paper documentation for that, which is something I'm very proud of. The second thing is if we could put people in place, what information could we gather from them? And that was when we did the issue reporting system, right? So we knew what was happening in the elections going on in real time. Well, look, this was only version 1.0. Version 1.0 was supposed to be, can we even do this at a large scale? And I think we were able to do that very successfully. From there, I argued that it needed to be permanent. As long as our side is going to fund election integrity through a party, we have to try to keep up with the other side, and we need to do it permanently. Not everybody agreed with that. This is relevant to Georgia because after the 2022 election cycle, they sent all of the election integrity department down here to knock doors and fired them all before they made it home. And I think that kind of set off a chain of events that there was a debate about whether election integrity should be permanent or not and housed at the RNC. And that's when I decided I needed to find something else to do, right? I needed to work on a project that was going to be full-time. Since then, though, they have brought in a whole new group of election integrity people. They have committed to make it a department. And here's what I will say about it. They're conducting a lot of legal activity. They always do, right? And they are putting people on the ground. The truth of the matter is this. We're 32, 31 days from the election. If you want to get involved in election integrity, you probably need to go through your party to get credentialed and fill a role. And I would encourage all of you to do this, right? Like the easiest way, look, this time around, we're so much better prepared than we were in 2020. They're not going to steal the election out from under our noses, right? Because we know what to look for. But do we have enough people on the ground to spot things? That's going to be the question. So I would say get involved, fill one of those roles. You're going to have to work through your party to do it probably. So get out and do it. And beyond the cycle, we'll see if it's a permanent thing still. I have high hopes that it will be. It seems like they've changed the structure around so that it is its own department and that it will have the resources it needs to be successful. So get involved. Like, we can't let the other side win just by sitting out.
I want to piggyback off and then go to Mark off of this. So, Mark, you've worked on different presidential campaigns as an attorney. What makes this cycle different? And do you believe we're better prepared?
I'm going to answer the second question first. Hell yes. We are so much better prepared. What makes this year so much different? I'm going to just take my personal example here. As an election law attorney, I've been involved in the ancillary lawsuits, keep putting Trump on the ballot since last August. But it wasn't until Labor Day that I was told to come to Georgia. I wasn't told to go to Philadelphia 4 years ago until about 7 days before the election. So just, elections, election day operations, we're working 2 months in advance rather than 7 days in advance. So that, there's a complete different thought process that's going on. And I can tell you that here in Georgia, we are putting together a battle center, a war room, a command center that has tons of partners out there, tons of people who are our eyes and ears, from elected officials to party bosses to poll observers. We got staff out there, and we have a two-way communication set up. It's not just, okay, call us and we'll take your information down, but if we need something, we know who these people are, we know where they're at, so that they can go get us the affidavits that we need to be prepared to file if lawsuits are necessary. I think many people are frustrated with what happened in 2020, and I have been given the job of making sure that we have pre-drafted legal briefs for any situation that we think is going to happen on election day. The first thing that they did is they gave me the Georgia file from 4 years ago. And I took one look at it, and I basically called them up and said, there's 100 briefs here, and only 3 of them have anything to do with election day. We have to start from scratch, and I have to write every last one of these out. Now, luckily, I saw this problem 6 weeks before the election, not the week before the election. But that is just an example of, 4 years ago, Georgia was not a target. They didn't think that they were going to use it, and they were not prepared. We had more of a celebration room with a couple lawyers sitting in it. Then we had a generals sitting in the war room knowing what information was going to come in and how they were going to be prepared, having, who's my lawyers, having communications with election officials, having communications with the courthouses. This is a completely different environment from 4 years ago.
And even 8 years ago, especially too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
It's a work in progress, and I agree with you. I think we're light years ahead of where we were. Do you mind talking about any potential litigation or ongoing litigation?
Well, this last 2 weeks, we brought a lawsuit in DeKalb County regarding DeKalb County refusing to take on voter challenges to the voter rolls. They just stopped hearing them. They just weren't going to do it. And so the RNC, President Trump, our names are not on those filings, but we were very involved in getting the attorneys to bring it and make sure that that lawsuit was filed. On Thursday this week, there was a lawsuit filed in Fulton County. The RNC is on that case, as is the Georgia GOP and the Fulton County GOP. And we sued because the Georgia law says that the party is allowed to submit a list of people to be poll workers, people who are paid to do the job. And of the 60-some people who were submitted by the GOP to work on election day, 3 were hired. So we went to court over it. We filed the lawsuit on Thursday. So there is, the RNC right now is involved in about 120 lawsuits nationwide. I believe the list is about 25 in Georgia right now that are going in some way or another. We are fully anticipating that there is going to be a lawsuit filed this next week over the storm by Mark Elias, because tomorrow, Monday, they're supposed to be mailing out absentee ballots, and if one county out there doesn't do it, even if it's a red rural county that was, they don't have their power on, he is going to try to use that in other parts of the state to try to absolutely dissolve all integrity in our elections. I've already seen some of the talking points that he's using. I haven't been necessarily talking to the governor or the secretary of state or lieutenant governors, but we have been making sure that they are aware of the election issues that Mark Elias and his ilk are about ready to bring, and make sure that we preempt as much of that as possible. So sometimes you win the battle, not in court, but you win it by making sure that people are properly educated about what the problems are going to be. And so I spent a lot of time this week, talking with some state senators and making sure that they understood that as long as the emergency order is in place, these are some of the things that are going to happen with election laws. And so we spent a lot of time this week hopefully preempting some litigation that we don't need to bring, because I would rather not have to undo stuff that some lowly trial court does, and we have to go up to the Supreme Court in last minute litigation. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. I mean, and just to give you all an idea about what they're talking, or what Mark was talking about the way the war room traditionally was for our state party, which is a model that, quite frankly, needs to be extinct, was, and this is something I talked about at the RNC, right? About and so many states were doing this, where attorneys would just show up on election day at the state party headquarters and wait for a phone to ring. All right, we are way ahead of where that was. We've got a sophisticated operation at this point, and levels of coordination. We are also, obviously, the RNC is active in filing proactive lawsuits and not just defending things. So things have changed quite a bit.
Jason?
Yeah.
Somebody had a question there? I don't know.
With what he said, because I live in a county far, far away, but I want to work in Fulton County. I've been rejected. I have not been successful today on one outcome election. I was advised to go to the Carter Center, and you mentioned how you're proactively filing lawsuits because they're not having a non-partisan group as observers. It's been 2 weeks since I've contacted the Carter Center. I've done multiple follow-up, and they're not responding to me. Maybe somebody could look into the Carter Center, why, to see the numbers of how many people applied and how many people were Republicans that were accepted. Because as I said, as of today, I have not received anything back from them.
On behalf of the RNC, we represent the Trump campaign. We really focus on the Republican side of things. I know that if you do not live in a county adjacent to Fulton County, you're not going to be able to work in Fulton County, so you can only work in the county that you live in, or one of the counties that are directly...
I understand that, but the Carter Center is...
Well, I understand. What I'm saying is, so you're never going to get a poll... If you do not live in an adjacent county, you're never going to get a poll worker position. But regarding the... and a poll watcher, that goes through the county party. That doesn't go through the election official, doesn't have anything to do it. Now, as to the Carter Center, that sounds interesting, but that would not be in my realm of responsibility. That would, that maybe one of these other people at this panel would be addressing it, but I can't do it.
All right. Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
The Carter Center in Fulton County has hired a monitor team, Ryan Germany, and the Carter Center. that's what the lady is referring to.
Mm-hmm.
And the Carter Center should take your application seriously for that. And I'd like to talk to you afterwards, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Mark, do you want to address in general about, for those who want to volunteer as a poll watcher, poll worker, attorney, talk about the importance of the relationships between attorneys, poll watchers, and poll workers as we go into the election cycle.
Okay, I'm going to start by, let's go back to the basics and let's define terms. When we use the term poll worker, we're usually talking about somebody who is paid by the county to actually work the elections. When we talk about a poll observer, that is usually somebody who is appointed by the county party to come and observe. There's a slight different distinction there. If you are a poll observer, you are the eyes and the ears for the GOP attorneys who are in the war room, and where we are receiving information that's coming in from the field, and then we are passing that on, as Josh mentioned, to the person in HQ. Now, the person in HQ this year is my boss, senior partner at the Dillon Law Group, Dave Warrington. He represents the campaign, and him and Janine will be side by side. They're going to be getting all these reports, and I understand that Donald Trump is going to be there quite a bit of the day. So I am the person who is doing that reporting to the person who's in his shoes, who I actually have to answer to 365 days a year. So I cannot be in every single precinct, in every single county. So in order for me to be efficient and effective, I need these observers around the state. And the question is, you see something, what are you supposed to do about it? Well, if you want to pull out your phone, I'm going to give you the hotline number. This number is going to be activated on the 14th. This number, if you see something, you're going to call that number, and we are going to have an attorney who will take down all the information. And based upon that information that comes in, we're going to be able to go, okay, we got a roving attorney that needs to go there and get a affidavit. Or maybe I'll have a GOP political leader go there and get more information. Or maybe I'll be calling a state legislature and they'll send their staff there. Or maybe I have a RNC staff member nearby that I'm going to be sending. I'm going to know where all these people are, and when I get a complaint coming in and I need more information before I pass it up the chain, I have somebody who I'm going to be calling on their cell phone and saying, get there now. So, you have been in your polling center. There are 4 machines, and 3 of them are not working. What are you supposed to do? You're going to step out of the polling center, you're going to pull out your cell phone, and you're going to dial 404 738 8393. Now, again, I'm talking, maybe you're not a poll observer. Maybe you're home baking cookies. And your sister-in-law calls you. And she says, hey, I was just at the polling center, and there were these people out there wearing Kamala Harris hats, and they were handing out water. What should I do? No, you do not call. What you do is you tell your sister-in-law, you need to call 404 738 8393. You don't call what somebody tells you, because that's called hearsay. And now you're going to force my team, when we need to get something, they're going to have to call you, And now you're gonna have to get us in touch with your friend, and you're forcing our team to play 3 levels of hearsay to get the information we need. So if you did not see it, don't report it. You get the person who saw it to report it. So when I give this number out, I give it out 3 times. So I'm going to give it to you one more time here. Again, during 2020, and this was not just Georgia, this was across the nation, but it was really bad here in the state of Georgia. People did not know who to call. And so many individuals were calling nonprofit groups, people that were not necessarily affiliated with the campaign. And there were many people who just brought their own lawsuits saying, I saw this, and they filed the lawsuit. And unfortunately, most of those cases ended up being dismissed because they lacked standing. You see, in our war room, we're going to have an attorney for the RNC. We're going to have an attorney for the Georgia GOP. We're going to have an attorney for President Trump. Which means when a lawsuit comes in that we need to file, in every situation, if we're filing a lawsuit, there are not one attorney, but there's actually 2 attorneys going into the courtroom to file. Because if the judge doesn't think that the campaign has it standing, the party is there with their attorney. We are prepared for the standing issue. Okay, we're not going to get cases thrown out for standing because we're going to make sure that we have 2 attorneys representing 2 different, one the party, one the campaign, so that way we make sure that we prevail on standing. But in 2020, so many people didn't know how to get the information to the Trump campaign. They didn't know how to get it to the Georgia GOP. And as such, there was a lot of lawsuits that were being brought that they didn't have all the information, and the campaign sure the hell didn't have the information. So the thing is, you see something, don't go post it on Twitter or social media, because we don't have enough staff to follow all your social media, okay? If you see something, you don't go report it to the local news media. We cannot track all of everything that's coming out in the media. We're going to do our best. But if you see something and you think that Donald Trump needs to know about it, there is one place, there is one number, and one thing you need to do. Jason, they need a call.
That's all. Where's Russ?
404-738-8393.
There it is. Thank you, Mark. Jake. First, no, Jake's probably falling asleep at this point, right? Jake, I'm going to ask you some questions about to explain these cases that you worked on, but I also want to know if there's anything you'd like to comment on that's already been said.
Well, first I want to thank Julianne Thompson. Is she in here?
Back row.
All right. Julianne, I know how much work it took to put this on, so let's give her a round of applause. She's been texting me about every week for the past month to make sure I'm here, and I made it here, so it's a win.
Yeah, I called him. He wouldn't even call me back,
Yeah.
so there you go.
So and Jason gave me a good intro. I'll give you a little bit more information, and then I'm going to tell you a number of stories that highlight at a micro level what happens and shows what happens at the macro level. In 2018, I represented a guy named Dan Gasaway in House District 28 that lost by 67 votes. In Georgia, there's a 5-day statute of limitations to file an election contest case. I get a call up, 4 p.m., on the last day of the statute of limitations from someone who says, hey, I've got a case, it's an election contest case, I think it may be a winner. My firm's not gonna let me take it, can you take it? Now, every lawyer will tell you, you never take this case. I didn't draft the petition. At this point, I was a 6-year associate. Earlier in my career, I had never done an election contest case. I knew nothing about the case. It's on the last day of the statute of limitations. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. and I took the case and I filed it. Now the case, someone else drafted it, ended up being screwed up and I had to fix it. But what it told me and taught me early in my career, and especially within the context of election integrity, is it takes a lot of courage to fight for and be an advocate for election integrity. And I'll tell you a second story in a second about why that's important, or why that's a reality. We go on to prove that there was systematic district misassignments in 2018, and we overturned the election. They have a new election. Dan Gasaway, my client, loses the second election by 2 votes. 2 votes. He calls me up and I'm like, Dan, are you sure you really want to do this? Do you want to file it for a second time and try to get a new election? And he says, yes, I really want to do this. Now, in 2018, this is before 2020, when election integrity was a mainstream issue. It was not a mainstream issue at this point in time. And in fact, the only person talking about election anything was a lady named Stacey Abrams, who refused to concede to an election in 2018, which is highly ironic to me because the Democrats claim the only party that questions elections, the only party that refuses to concede, the only person that says, oh, there's inaccuracy in voting is Donald Trump. That's not true. The first person to do it was Stacey Abrams. She made it a national issue and raised over $200 million on an alleged voter suppression lie. That's a fact.
I'm going to counter you. Jill Stein in 2016.
Yep.
She raised a lot of money too.
Yep. And so in 2018, this is not a mainstream issue. We overturn it. And in fact, at this point, Kemp was the Secretary of State. We were getting pressure not to file it a second time, but we did it anyway because election integrity is a very important issue. Now I'm going to tell you, I have a couple very good stories, and this is one of my favorite stories of my legal career. And this story is very, very important because I want to arm each of you guys with real world stories and facts that contradict a lot of the rhetoric that we hear on the other side. One of the pieces of rhetoric this is false, which is there is no voter fraud. Voter fraud's a lie. Voter fraud is a myth. There is no voter fraud. Everything's secure. I mean, my God, I've heard it so much. The thing with voter fraud is it is extremely hard to prove. And I'm going to tell you a story about why it is extremely hard to prove. In our second election contest case, and almost election and contests in Georgia are very, very hard to win. They're very hard to win for a multitude of factors. One, the law makes it almost impossible to win. There's a million procedural requirements you have to meet. You got to sue the right party. You got to file it within 5 days of election certification. You got to make sure you serve the state election board with a copy and certify under oath that you did it. There's all this stuff you got to do, and it's really easy to mess up. And if you don't do it regularly, you probably are going to mess it up, and many lawyers do mess it up. The second reason why it's very hard is the law makes a presumption in favor of the validity of elections. Law doesn't want you to overturn elections all the time. So in our second election contest, we find out that there is a person that says that she lives at a lot that does not have a house. You're looking at me right now, you're thinking that can't be true, that is absolutely wild. Who would ever do that? So my client, Dan Gasaway, we have suspicions that there's a lot that she signs a voter certificate that has no house, and there's no house there. I get my client to drive by, gets out his phone, he takes some pictures of the lot with no house, he sends it to me. I subpoenaed the lady before and I said, listen, I call her up. She's pissed, she's screaming at me, whatever. And I'm like, you got 2 options. The first option is you can say that you cast an illegal vote because the lot that does not have a house is in the district, but she really lives at a lot that's outside of the district. So 1, you can go in, you can admit you made a mistake, or 2, you're gonna have to abide by the subpoena and show up to court. Guess what? I live at that lot, screw you, I'll see you in court. Okay. She shows up to court. Fox 5 News is there. She made the news this day. Fox 5 News is there. This is a nationally watched election because Stacey Abrams is making an issue, trying to question Brian Kemp, whatever. I mean, the courtroom was packed. I get her on the stand. I hand her her voter certificate, which says that she lives at a lot that has no house. And I say, Miss, I'm not going to say her name. She still to this day hates me, and if she was in the room, she'd probably try to hit my kneecaps out. But I get her on the stand and I say, do you live at this house? Yes, I live at this house. And I say, do you brush your teeth every night at the house? Yeah. Do you park your car there every night? I do. Do you eat dinner there every night? I do. And it reminded me, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Alice in Wonderland, where Alice is chasing the rabbit down the path into the briar patch, but I'm just pulling her in. Do you watch TV there every night? I do. Do you make microwavable meals there? I do. And then I hand her plaintiff's exhibit number 38, which is the picture of the lot with no house. And I have never seen someone turn more Casper White in my life, because at that moment she realized, one, she was lying under oath. Two, she committed voter fraud because the voter certificates are under penalty of perjury. And three, everybody in the courtroom, including Fox 5 News, just caught her in a bold-faced lie. But what's important about that story is two reasons. One, people do commit voter fraud, period. She said she lived at a lot that did not have a house on it. And the more important point to me and the takeaway for all of you guys is it took me filing an election contest case, sending her a subpoena, calling her, telling her, listen, I've caught you in a lie, just fess up to it, getting her into court, asking her, not only did she brush her teeth at the house, not only did she eat dinner, not only did she go to bed there, all of which she lied, but giving her the picture of the lot with no house to finally fess up to committing voter fraud. Now, this is one microcosm. This is one small case in a House district in Georgia that shows that voter fraud does, in fact, happen. So if anyone ever tells you, and I'll get to my second story, and these election contest cases are absolutely fascinating cases. And the reason why they're fascinating is they take you into real world America. The people that I've talked to in these cases are just everyday people who either made a mistake, either committed voter fraud, whatever it is. My second case that is fascinating to me is a case that was filed in Long County, Georgia. This is the only one I've lost, and I should have won it, and I'll tell you about it. I represented the probate court judge, the incumbent in Long County, Georgia, who lost by 9 votes. We began to look at the data and determine that many people had voted twice. I know that sounds crazy, and I was mind blown at the time. As we're looking at the data, we see the same names voting early voting and voting election day. And we're like, how in the world can this happen? This has to be a typo. This can't really have happened. And I have a great expert, his name's Mark Davis, and we are literally thinking, how can we find out if this really happened? How can we find out if people actually voted twice? And you know what we finally concluded? The only way we can find out is if we just call them and ask them. So quite literally, we get these people, we run reports on these people, we get their numbers, and the first gentleman I called was a guy named Hamilton Evans. No, my name's Jake Evans, no relation to me. And I call up this guy. You guys got to think about what I'm about to do. I'm about to, in effect, call this person up and tell them, you voted twice, I know you voted twice, you committed voter fraud. What do you think is going to happen? What do I think is going to happen? They're going to hang up. They're going to not respond to my call. And I only have one shot. Because if they hang up, the only option I really have at that point is I got to show up at the house, or I got to subpoena them in court. And any good lawyer will tell you, when you got someone on the stand, you really don't want to ask a question you don't know the answer to. So this is a very important call. I call up this guy, Mr. Evans, and I'm thinking, I tell him, Mr. Evans, you may have possibly inadvertently, accidentally voted twice. And you know what Hamilton Evans said? He said, I did it, and I did it just because I wanted to see if they'd let me do it, and they let me do it. He was the lead. Hold on, let me finish all these stories, and
I do have a question for
Yeah.
you, Beth. In regard to your cousin, Hamilton Evans. Did you record that call?
No, we didn't record. Mark may have.
Okay.
Mark Davis may have. So he was my lead witness in the case. We ultimately discovered, and the Secretary of State admitted to, and this was in 2020, that over 1,500 people statewide in Georgia voted twice. That happened. The system allowed it to happen. We ultimately, there was a 9-vote margin. We proved 7 illegal votes, all of which were double voters. There was absentee ballots that had no signatures, which to me is an ineligible ballot. The judge was terrified to overturn an election because it was in the heart. This was in November. He ruled against us because he didn't want to give any fodder to any of the stuff Trump says, which actually a lot of the stuff Trump says was absolutely right. I'm going to get to that in a moment. And so that's the only one I didn't win. We should have won it. So the part about courage. In 2020, I was lead counsel for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. The Pennsylvania House was ground zero prior to and during the 2020 election. In 2020, the Democrats, and it sounds like they're going to try to do it with the hurricane, used COVID as a pretext in order to just about eviscerate electoral protections to allow for massive mail-in voting, drop box voting, and ballot harvesting. It just happened. Don't be mad at me for saying it happened. I'm just telling you this is what happened. In Pennsylvania, the governor passed or unilaterally entered an executive order that allowed for mass ballot harvesting, which is illegal in Pennsylvania, allowed for mass drop box voting, which was historically illegal in Pennsylvania, and allowed for zero signature verification of mail-in voting. That's a fact. Don't get mad at me, it just happened. So we filed an emergency. First, it goes to an evidentiary hearing, and this was the most weird evidentiary hearing I've ever had in my life. It was in Pennsylvania. You had to wear a mask. We were in little cubes with plastic everywhere, but it was insane. It was literally completely whack. We go in there, we win the evidentiary hearing, which means that the Democrats are claiming U.S. Postal Service is so far behind, there's no way we're going to meet these requirements. We have to soften all the rules, health, whatever. And we're saying, no, you are changing. Election laws in the United States can only be passed by legislatures. That's who you guys elect. You can't have unilateral dictators come in and just say, we're going to eviscerate all the rules and change them at the 11th hour, which is just what they did. So we said, we have to segregate all the ballots that are not being cast properly as the duly enacted legislator passed these rules. We have to put in one batch, and then you can have the normal ballots at a different batch, and then we're going to have SCOTUS or someone decide. The Court of Appeals agrees with us in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, very liberal, disagrees with us. We go to the United States Supreme Court. I was lead counsel for the Pennsylvania House before the United States Supreme Court in the midst of a United States presidential election. Very proud moment for me. But the problem was I got harassed. I was getting calls at my office every 20 minutes with lunatics in Oregon and Washington threatening. I was getting hate mail. I was getting emails. I was getting emails to the CEO of my firm copying me. It was absolute lunacy. Trying to get me fired, trying to get me this. All I'm doing is representing a client. All I'm doing is trying to enforce the law as it exists. And these people are going after my livelihood. That's a fact. That happened. I still have the emails. I still have the calls. And I say that to say is a real world story. That is a sacrifice that people who are on the front lines fighting for election integrity have to make in order to ensure that our elections are safe. The next point I'm going to make, and then I will have one more point and I'm going to close. Proving a negative is almost impossible. So if I told you guys, all right, you're a smart group of folks, I want you to tell me and show me that in 2022 in Georgia there was less voter fraud than in 2020. Go ahead. What are you going to do? You can't. It is almost impossible to do that. But what I will say is there was less voter fraud in 2022 than in 2020. And guess what? Republicans in Georgia won by much bigger margins in 2022 than they did in 2020. And so if we tighten the election rules and laws in Georgia, I can guarantee you the margin will get better because I believe Democrats think that they are on moral high ground and they're morally entitled to bend the rules because they believe at a visceral level that if they don't step in and maybe throw in a few more ballots here in Philadelphia, throw in a few more ballots here in Atlanta, that we may lose democracy. There has been 2 assassination attempts this election cycle, and they've only been against one nominee of one party. Why is that? Because Democrats believe they are morally entitled to potentially kill another human being in order to protect democracy when their party had no democratic process for the nomination of their candidate, period. Kamala Harris has never gotten a vote in a presidential primary election. She dropped out in 2020 before any of the votes were cast, and she got no votes in 2024. She was coronated, period. So who's the party of any democracy? I know I'm getting a little off topic here. All right, so to close all this out, True the Vote it's a client of mine, one of my favorite clients. I represented them in a 2-week jury trial in the Northern District of Georgia. We won a complete defense verdict with a judge, Judge Jones. I love him. He was appointed by Barack Obama, and he ruled in our favor in totality, and that shows he did what was right. He didn't allow partisan politics to come in. I cross-examined many people who had brought the case. What they brought this case saying, True the Vote violated Section 11B of the Constitution, which says you can't intimidate voters by filing eligibility voter challenges. Now, this is important for 2 points. The first point is, under the NVRA, voter rolls are frozen 90 days before an election. So that means that if I moved out, let's just say you have to live in the county in which you vote 30 days before an election. If I moved to Idaho 31 days before, then I am not eligible to vote, but there's no way to get me off the voter rolls. The NVRA freezes the rolls. The only way you can do that is eligibility challenges. So that's why it's important for you guys to stay involved, and it's a big issue, and it's a good job Mark doing what they're doing and DeKalb to allow this to go forward. They have a number of people that say that because these eligibility challenges that were filed, which they never knew they were filed, they never talked to any of the defendants in the case, that they were intimidated. One of the witnesses I got on the stand, his name was Scott Burson. This guy said, this is a true story, this is really pathetic, that he was intimidated because someone called him to confirm that he lived at the address that he lived at and asked for a bill, like showing he actually lived at that address. And I said, well, why would that intimidate you? And he said, well, they questioned my eligibility. Well, he had just lived in Auburn, Alabama, like 2 months before. And I said, did you have trouble getting a bill to show that? That's pretty easy, right? And he said he had no bills in his name, that his parents paid all of his bills, and as a result, looking for a bill intimidated him and made him feel as though he was being attacked in some way. This is on the stand under oath, the man said it. But the worst part of it all was I asked him, how did you find out about the case? Why did you do it? Whatever. And he said Fair Fight, who is a Democrat organization who did this, called him, told him to do it, and in effect offered him compensation, which is illegal, to do it under oath. And I point blank said, would you have ever filed the case if Fair Fight didn't tell you to file it? And he said no. And that shows you what we're up against. The Democrat Party and all of their money and all of their C4s are using human beings in order to further a political crusade which has no legitimacy in fact. That case, we won in a complete defense verdict, and the opening line of my first closing statement was exactly that. They're using our justice system with their huge amounts of money and human beings to launch crusades which have no legitimacy in fact. I have won 3 election contests. The most recent one I have very quickly, Jason, and I'll stop, is we represented a guy who's actually a Democrat. He was in, what county was it? Tift County, Georgia. He lost by 2 votes, and the whole establishment had tried to take him down. The establishment didn't like him, didn't want him to win. His cousin lived in the district, called him up and said, hey, I couldn't vote. I wanted to vote for you. I couldn't vote for you. And True the Vote actually helped fund this litigation. And we looked at it, and they had assigned an entire apartment complex out of the district when they were in the district. And the county did the right thing and actually conceded to a new election. So it shows that I think gradually over time, especially when they see my name on the other side of the V, over time, we are getting closer. Elections are never going to be perfect. But if we look at an imperfect system and claim uncritically the system is perfect, then I'll tell you, my wife will tell you, I'm not a perfect human. I try to get better every day. But we have to make sure our election system, which I think is getting better every day, continues to improve. And I think what's going to gradually happen is the Republican numbers are going to get better, but it is impossible to prove, or very difficult to prove, a negative. And I wanted to arm you guys with all of those stories to know, if anyone says there is no voter fraud, well, guess what? People voted twice in Georgia. If they say there's no voter fraud, well, guess what? Someone said they lived in an address with no house. These are real world examples at the micro level to undoubtedly prove what happens at the macro level.
Thank you, Jake. I know Mark has to catch a flight back to California. I think I want to ask Mark, wrap this up. One last question, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Real quick. Can you address judges that volunteer and the importance to advocate for judges to volunteer?
Are you talking about duty judges?
Yes, on-duty judges.
Well, here in Georgia, you have judicial circuits, and in every judicial circuit, there is going to be what's called an on-duty judge. And why is that? Because you all know that the courthouse closes at 5 o'clock. But what time do the polls close? What happens if there's a problem with the polls between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock? Or what happens if there's a problem at the tabulation center at 10 o'clock at night? Well, every judicial circuit has a judge who is designated as a duty judge, and it's one of the things that the campaign does is we get the phone number of that duty judge. And unfortunately in Georgia, the Democrat Party works very well to try to encourage judges who lean that way to volunteer to be the duty judge. Now, if you're a judge, do you really want to take on additional work? Do you really want, you want to go out and do stuff on Tuesday night. If you're the duty judge, you have to stay by your phone. You have to be ready for these last minute filings. Do you really want to put your neck on the line that you're going to have to make a decision that could affect an election? And so many conservative or middle-of-the-road judges, when a Democrat judge says, hey, I'll volunteer to do the duty judge, they say, guess what? Okay, we'll let you do the extra work. So if you know a judge, encourage them, if they're a good one, encourage them to volunteer among the judges in their circuit to be the duty judge.
Superior Court.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, last thing. I think I need to release Mark.
I do have to go, so.
But I just wanted to say something real quick. You know, sometimes you'll see people out there in social media saying, well, it's Republican lawyers, they don't do anything regarding election integrity. Now you know, all right? Maybe we're not the best at shamelessly self-promoting ourselves, right? But you just heard today from 3 election law experts about election integrity and the cases they're involved in and the work they're involved in, not only here in Georgia, but throughout the country. So please give a hand for all 3 of them.